Baggy grey sweaters and oversized slacks were her impenetrable armor. Katrina deliberately buried her 200-pound frame under layers of cheap fleece, praying she would remain completely invisible in the cutthroat corporate world of Chicago. It worked flawlessly on her cruel co-workers and her backstabbing ex-boyfriend, but she severely underestimated Dwayne Russo. While everyone else saw a frumpy, overweight bookkeeper to mock, the most dangerous crime boss in the Midwest saw a lush, brilliant queen waiting to be violently unearthed. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the sleek, glass-paneled offices of Russo Logistics, casting a sterile glare over the 72nd floor of the downtown Chicago high-rise. Katrina Evans sat hunched over her dual monitors, her thick fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. She was swathed in a men's 3XL navy blue cardigan that hung past her knees, paired with shapeless black slacks that dragged slightly on the carpet. Beneath the heavy, suffocating layers of wool and cotton, Katrina hid a body that society and her own trauma had taught her to hate. She weighed 215 pounds. She had a soft, prominent belly, thick, heavy thighs that rubbed together when she walked, and a remarkably full bust that she aggressively strapped down with restrictive sports bras. To the pristine, size 2 administrative assistants and the gym-obsessed finance bros of the firm, Katrina was a running joke. They called her the Navy tent behind her back. No one was crueler than Liam Bradley. Liam was the senior financial director, a title he held entirely because of Katrina's grueling, uncredited labor. He was also her ex-boyfriend. 3 years ago, when Katrina was a naive junior accountant, Liam had charmed her into a quiet, secret relationship. She had cooked for him, cleaned his apartment, and done his corporate portfolios. Then, the night before a major promotion, she found him in his Mercedes-Benz with a thin, blonde receptionist. When Katrina had confronted him, her heart shattering into a million jagged pieces, Liam had looked her up and down with utter disgust. "Come on, Katrina," he had sneered, his words forever burned into her psyche. "Look at you. You're fat. You're a whale. Did you honestly think a guy like me would proudly walk down Michigan Avenue holding hands with someone who looks like a marshmallow in a tarp? Be realistic. You're good for doing my spreadsheets, and that's it." Since that day, Katrina had retreated completely into her shell. She stopped trying to find clothes that flattered her plus-size figure. She stopped wearing makeup. She became a ghost, silently doing Liam's work because he continuously threatened to have her fired if she didn't comply. He had the ear of the upper management, and she was just the fat girl in the corner. But upper management was about to experience a terrifying shake-up. Rumors had been swirling for weeks that the actual owner of the company, Dwayne Russo, was coming to Chicago to audit the branch himself. Russo Logistics was an open secret in the underworld. It was a highly lucrative, perfectly legal front for the Russo crime syndicate, a mafia family that controlled the ports from New York to the Great Lakes. At exactly 10 o'clock on a rainy Tuesday morning, the temperature in the office seemed to drop 20 degrees. The heavy double doors of the executive suite swung open, and Dwayne Russo walked in. He was a man who sucked the oxygen out of any room he entered. Standing 6'4", dressed in a custom-tailored pitch-black Armani suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and narrow waist, Dwayne looked like a predator violently forced into civilized clothing. His hair was dark and swept back, his jawline covered in a harsh scuff, and his eyes were a pale, piercing amber that missed absolutely nothing. He was trailed by 4 massive men with bulges under their jackets. "Boardroom," Dwayne rumbled, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver down Katrina's spine. "All senior staff, now." Katrina kept her head down, desperately trying to blend into her cubicle walls. She wasn't senior staff. She was just the invisible drone. But Liam paused by her desk, slamming a thick file onto her keyboard. "I need the quarterly projections for the Southside warehouses, Shamu," Liam hissed venomously, adjusting his silk tie. "And fix the discrepancies in the offshore routing. If Russo asks questions, I need the answers fed to my tablet immediately. Do not screw this up, or you'll be on the street begging for donuts." Katrina swallowed the thick lump of humiliation in her throat, her cheeks burning red. "I fixed the offshore routing last night, Liam. The numbers you entered were triggering a federal red flag. I buried the surplus in the shell company accounts, just like you asked." "Whatever. Just make sure the dashboard is live," Liam snapped, marching toward the glass boardroom. For the next 2 hours, Katrina sat at her desk, watching the boardroom through the glass walls. Dwayne Russo sat at the head of the long oak table, radiating a lethal, terrifying stillness. Liam was standing at the projector, confidently presenting Katrina's intricate financial models. He was taking credit for her genius, smiling his smarmy, practiced smile. Suddenly, Dwayne raised a single, heavily ringed hand. The room fell dead silent. Even through the thick glass, Katrina could see the sheer panic flash across Liam's face. Dwayne leaned forward, pointing a long, tattooed finger at the projection. He was asking a question. Liam stammered. He tapped his tablet wildly, waiting for Katrina to send him the lifeline. Katrina quickly typed the explanation of the tax loophole into their secure chat, but Liam was so flustered he misread it entirely. He blurted out an answer that made the other executives wince. Dwayne didn't yell. He didn't even blink. He simply turned his head, his pale amber eyes slowly scanning the open office floor outside the boardroom. He was looking for the real brain behind the operation. He knew a hollow suit like Liam couldn't have designed a money laundering algorithm that sophisticated. And then, through the glass, Dwayne's eyes locked directly onto Katrina. Katrina froze. Her breath hitched in her chest. She tugged frantically at the collar of her oversized sweater, trying to shrink further into her ergonomic chair. She was used to people looking right through her. But Dwayne wasn't looking through her. He was looking at her. His gaze dropped from her panicked face to the massive, shapeless bulk of her clothing, and a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of his ruthless mouth. He knew. By 9 p.m., the office was deserted. The storm outside had escalated, violent sheets of rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the high-rise. The building's HVAC system had been shut off for the night, leaving the sprawling office floor stiflingly warm. Katrina was the only one left. Liam had ordered her to stay behind to recalibrate the entire third-quarter portfolio because Dwayne had demanded a full forensic review by the following morning. Katrina was exhausted. Her lower back ached, and sweat was beginning to bead on her forehead. The heavy fleece cardigan she wore was becoming an unbearable oven. Thinking she was entirely alone, Katrina finally gave in to the oppressive heat. She stood up, checked the dark, empty corridors, and slowly unbuttoned the massive navy cardigan, shrugging it off her shoulders and draping it over her chair. Underneath, she wore a simple, white button-down shirt. It was still a men's size XL, but without the heavy armor of the sweater, the sheer physics of her body could no longer be completely hidden. The thin, damp cotton clung to her thick, fleshy waist. The fabric pulled dangerously tight across her heavy, abundant breasts, the buttons straining against the pressure. Her wide, plush hips and thick thighs were clearly defined beneath the cheap slacks. She was unmistakably, heavily plus-sized, and beautifully soft. Katrina sighed, raising her plump arms to gather her frizzy brown hair into a messy bun, unintentionally arching her back and thrusting her heavy chest forward. "The algorithm you built for the Cayman accounts is flawless," a dark, velvet voice echoed from the shadows. "But the idiot presenting it doesn't know the difference between a hedge fund and a hawala." Katrina screamed, violently spinning around. She collided with the edge of her desk, her hands instinctively flying up to cover her chest. Dwayne Russo stepped out of the darkness of the hallway. He had discarded his suit jacket, wearing only a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, exposing forearms corded with dense muscle and intricate dark ink. He moved with the silent, terrifying grace of an apex predator, his eyes locked onto her with an intensity that made Katrina's knees weak. "Mr. Russo," Katrina gasped, her voice trembling. She frantically reached for her giant cardigan, desperate to cover her fat body. I'm sorry. I thought everyone had gone home. I'm just finishing up Mr. Bradley's reports." Dwayne stepped closer, his large hand snapping out to snatch the cardigan before she could grab it. He tossed the heavy fleece onto a nearby filing cabinet, out of her reach. "Leave it," he commanded softly, his voice leaving absolutely no room for debate. "It's 90 degrees in here, Piccola, little one. You're sweating." Katrina's heart hammered furiously against her ribs. She crossed her thick arms over her stomach, shrinking under his intense scrutiny. "Please," she whispered, tears of profound embarrassment pricking her eyes. I know how I look. You don't have to look at me. I'll just get my work done and leave." Dwayne stopped just inches away from her. The scent of him, rich cedar, expensive tobacco, and pure concentrated danger enveloped her senses. He didn't look at her with the disgust Liam always showed. He didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her like a starving man staring at an absolute feast. "And how do you look, Katrina?" Dwayne asked, his voice dropping an octave as his eyes slowly, deliberately dragged down the strained buttons of her white shirt, tracing the lush, heavy curves of her hips and the thick swell of her thighs. "Fat," she choked out, her gaze glued to the carpet. "I know I'm huge. My ex-boyfriend, Liam, he reminds me every day. That's why I hide. So please just let me put my sweater back on." A terrifying, murderous darkness flashed in Dwayne's amber eyes at the mention of Liam's name. His jaw clenched so hard, a muscle ticked visibly in his cheek. Slowly, Dwayne reached out. Katrina flinched, expecting a blow or a cruel shove, but instead, she felt the calloused, incredibly warm tips of his fingers gently tilt her chin upward. He forced her to look into his eyes. "Liam Bradley is a dead man walking," Dwayne said, his tone conversational but dripping with lethal intent. "He is a thief, a liar, and a fundamentally stupid man. But his greatest sin is his absolute blindness." Dwayne's hand moved from her chin, his large palm coming to rest flat against her soft, plush stomach. Katrina gasped at the intimate contact. No one had touched her there without recoiling in years. But Dwayne's hand was firm, reverent, hot against her skin through the thin cotton. "You are not hiding any more, Katrina," Dwayne murmured, stepping so close his chest brushed against her heavy breasts. "I have been surrounded by synthetic, starving women in my world for a decade. Do you have any idea what it does to a man like me to see a woman so soft, so abundantly gorgeous, wrapping herself in garbage to protect the fragile ego of a weak boy. Katrina was paralyzed. Her mind was short-circuiting. The head of a mafia empire was standing in her cubicle, touching her belly and calling her beautiful. It had to be a cruel joke, a trick. The offshore accounts. Katrina deflected desperately, trying to step back, but her hips hit the desk. Liam didn't route the money. I did. I saw the unlisted LLCs. I know what this company is doing, Mr. Russo. I know you're washing millions for the syndicate. If you're here to kill me because I know too much, just do it. But don't mock me. Dwayne didn't pull a gun. Instead, a dark, genuine chuckle rumbled deep in his chest. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, sending violent shivers down her spine. "Kill my brilliant, gorgeous little bookkeeper," he whispered. "Not a chance, sweetheart. I don't destroy assets. I claim them. And starting tomorrow, you don't work for Russo Logistics. You work for me, personally." The morning sun cast long, dramatic shadows across the polished marble floor of the executive boardroom. At 9 a.m. sharp, Liam Bradley strode into the room. A smug, arrogant grin plastered across his handsome face. He held a sleek leather portfolio tucked under his arm, confident that Katrina's late-night labor was about to secure him a massive bonus and a seat on the regional board. Dwayne Russo was already seated at the head of the table. Flanking him were two massive enforcers, their faces entirely devoid of emotion. To Liam's immediate annoyance, Katrina was also in the room. But she wasn't cowering in the corner in her usual grey tent. Under Dwayne's strict, terrifying orders issued the night before, Katrina had gone home and dug into the very back of her closet. She was currently wearing a deep burgundy wrap dress. It was a piece she had bought years ago and never dared to wear. The soft, heavy fabric clung desperately to her generous curves, pulling tight across her large breasts and emphasizing the thick, soft swell of her hips and stomach. She was visibly trembling, clutching a manila folder to her chest, her face flushed red, with anxiety as the executives stared at her. "What is she doing in here?" Liam hissed, stopping dead in his tracks. He sneered at Katrina's dress. "Are we hosting a bake sale, Evans? Go back to your desk before you break a chair." The silence in the room instantly became violently heavy. Dwayne didn't raise his voice. He didn't even stand up. He simply steepled his fingers on the oak table and stared at Liam with the cold, unblinking gaze of a great white shark. "Sit down, Bradley," Dwayne ordered softly. Liam gulped, his smug smile faltering. He quickly took a seat near the middle of the table, opening his portfolio. "Mr. Russo, I have the revised Q3 projections you requested. I stayed up all night, finalizing the offshore." "You didn't write a single line of that code," Dwayne interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a straight razor. "You didn't balance those ledgers. You didn't construct the shell companies. You spent last night at a cocktail bar in River North with an intern, paying for $50 martinis using a stolen company credit card." Liam's face drained of all color. Sir, I don't know who told you that, but," Dwayne gestured to Katrina. "Ms. Evans, walk us through the Cayman routing." Katrina took a shaky breath. She looked at Liam's panicked face, the man who had verbally abused her, humiliated her, and shattered her self-esteem for years. Then she looked at Dwayne. The Mafia Boss gave her a slow, encouraging nod, his eyes dropping briefly to her cleavage before returning to her face, a clear, possessive heat radiating from him. Empowered by the terrifying man backing her, Katrina stepped forward, She laid her folder on the table. The original ledger created by Mr. Bradley was fundamentally flawed. He attempted to siphon 4.2% of the unlisted cash flow into a private dummy account registered under his mother's maiden name. Embezzlement. He tried to hide it within the legitimate logistics overhead, but the math created a recursive error. I found it. I isolated the stolen funds, rerouted them back into the primary syndicate holdings, and locked the dummy account. The executives gasped. Liam leapt to his feet, his chair crashing to the floor behind him. "You fat bitch!" Liam screamed, lunging toward Katrina. "You set me up! You—" Liam never made it within 5 feet of her. With blinding speed, one of Dwayne's enforcers stepped forward, intercepting Liam. The massive man grabbed Liam by the throat and the belt, effortlessly lifting him off the floor and slamming him face first into the heavy oak boardroom table. The sickening crack of Liam's nose breaking echoed through the room. Blood instantly splattered across the polished wood. Katrina flinched, stepping back, but Dwayne was suddenly right behind her. His large, hot hand rested firmly on the small of her back, a physical anchor grounding her in the chaos. "Embezzlement from a corporate logistics firm gets you fired and arrested, Bradley," Dwayne said, walking slowly toward the bleeding, sobbing man pinned to the table. "But you didn't steal from a corporate firm. You stole from the Russo family. You tried to steal my money. And worse." Dwayne reached down, grabbing a fistful of Liam's expensive hair, yanking his bloody face up so he was forced to look at Katrina. "You disrespected the woman who just saved my empire from a federal audit. Please, please, Mr. Russo, I'll pay it back." Liam sobbed hysterically, blood pouring from his nose, his former arrogance completely pulverized. "I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know." Karma had finally arrived, and it was wearing an impeccably tailored Italian suit. "Take him to the warehouse by the docks," Dwayne ordered his men, his voice utterly devoid of mercy. "Let the boys in the basement explain our severance package to him, slowly." Liam screamed and thrashed as he was dragged out of the boardroom by his collar, his expensive shoes scraping against the marble, leaving a trail of blood and shattered pride in his wake. The heavy wooden doors clicked shut, plunging the room back into a terrifying silence. The remaining executives sat completely frozen, terrified to even breathe. Dwayne turned around, pulling a crisp linen handkerchief from his pocket and wiping a single drop of blood from his cuff. He looked at the trembling executives. "Katrina Evans is now the Chief Financial Officer of Russo Enterprises," Dwayne announced, walking back to Katrina and wrapping his heavy arm securely around her thick waist, pulling her flush against his solid side. "She reports solely to me. Anyone who speaks to her without absolute, utter respect will find themselves joining Mr. Bradley at the docks. Meeting adjourned." As the executives hastily scrambled out of the room, Katrina stood trembling against Dwayne's side. The adrenaline was crashing, and she realized the terrifying reality of her new life. She wasn't an invisible bookkeeper anymore. She was the right hand to a mafia don. Dwayne looked down at her, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her wide hip through the burgundy fabric of her dress. "You did perfectly, Mia Regina. My queen," he murmured, his eyes dark with unbridled lust and lethal affection. "Now, we are leaving. I'm taking you to Michigan Avenue. We are buying out half the boutiques in the city. You will never hide this spectacular body in a cheap sweater again." Sunlight poured through the massive skylights of the exclusive Michigan Avenue boutique, reflecting off polished brass fixtures and pristine white marble floors. Katrina stood awkwardly in the center of the showroom, feeling entirely out of place. The air smelled of expensive perfume and pretentious wealth. For years, she had purchased her oversized, shapeless garments from discount big-box stores, entirely avoiding high-end fashion districts where sample sizes ruled, and women who looked like her were subtly or overtly pushed out the door. A tall, painfully thin saleswoman with a sleek blonde bob and a sharp, judgmental gaze approached them. Her name tag read Cynthia. Cynthia looked at Katrina's wide hips and thick waist, then let her eyes drift over the rumpled burgundy dress Katrina had worn to the office. A barely concealed sneer touched the saleswoman's painted lips. "May I help you?" Cynthia asked, her tone dripping with polite condescension. "If you are looking for the maternity or plus-size section, we do not carry those lines in this particular flagship location. You might want to try the department store 3 blocks down." Katrina instinctively shrank back, her old habits flaring up instantly. She reached out, her fingers brushing the sleeve of Dwayne's black suit jacket. "Dwayne, she's right. Let's just go. I don't belong in a place like this." Dwayne did not move. He stood like a monolith of dark, furious energy, his amber eyes locking onto Cynthia with a terrifying intensity. He slowly unbuttoned his suit jacket, revealing the holster strapped to his ribs. Cynthia's arrogant expression shattered instantly, replaced by wide-eyed, breathless terror. "You will lock the front doors," Dwayne commanded, his voice a low, lethal purr that echoed off the marble walls. "You will cancel every appointment you have for the rest of the day. You will bring out every single designer gown, blouse, skirt and coat you have in this building that will fit this spectacular woman. If you do not have her size, you will call your competitors and have them brought here by courier within the hour. If you ever speak to my chief financial officer with that tone of voice again, I will buy this entire building just to bulldoze it with you inside." Cynthia swallowed hard, her perfectly manicured hands trembling violently. "Right away, sir. I apologize. I completely misunderstood." Within 10 minutes, the entire dynamic of the boutique had shifted into a frantic, terrified frenzy. Store managers and seamstresses buzzed around Katrina like worker bees. Champagne was poured. Racks of custom silk, rich velvets, and tailored cashmere were wheeled out from the secretive back rooms. For the first time in her life, Katrina was not forced into a garment designed to hide her. Under Dwayne's watchful, predatory gaze, she was draped in clothes constructed to worship her. She stepped out of the dressing room, wearing an emerald green silk wrap dress that hugged the heavy curve of her breasts and cascaded beautifully over her plush hips and thick thighs. The fabric cinched tightly at her waist, giving her a devastating hourglass silhouette. She looked in the floor-to-ceiling mirror and gasped. The woman staring back was not a frumpy, invisible ghost. She was a lush, powerful siren. Dwayne stood up from the velvet sofa, his amber eyes completely dilated. He walked up behind her, his large hands resting heavily on her wide hips, his thumbs pressing into the soft flesh of her waist. He met her gaze in the mirror. "No more hiding," Dwayne whispered, his chest pressing against her back. "You are magnificent, Katrina. You have a mind that terrifies men, and a body that brings them to their knees. It is time you stepped into the light." But the light cast long, dangerous shadows. 3 hours later, Katrina was sitting in the back of Dwayne's armored Maybach, surrounded by dozens of shopping bags as they drove toward his private estate on the Gold Coast. The opulence of her new reality was dizzying. Yet as they pulled up to the heavily guarded, wrought-iron gates of the Russo compound, the brutal reality of Dwayne's world came crashing down. Waiting on the front steps of the massive stone mansion was a man Katrina had never seen before. He was older, with silver hair and a sharp, patrician nose, flanked by 6 heavily armed men. Dwayne's jaw clenched instantly, the romantic, possessive energy radiating from him vanishing, replaced by cold, calculating violence. "Stay in the car, Katrina," Dwayne ordered, slipping his hand inside his jacket to rest on his weapon. "Lock the doors." "Who is that?" she asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Arthur Moretti," Dwayne sneered, his eyes narrowed. "The head of the West Side Syndicate. A cockroach who thinks he can feast on my crumbs. Don't move." Katrina watched through the tinted, bulletproof glass as Dwayne stepped out of the Maybach. His enforcers instantly materialized from the shadows of the estate, forming a lethal wall around their boss. The tension in the air was so thick it felt suffocating. Arthur Moretti smiled a cold, reptilian smile. "Dwayne, I heard you had an exciting morning downtown." I was surprised to learn that Liam Bradley, our mutual friend, who was supplying me with a very lucrative stream of offshore data, suddenly had a tragic accident at the docks. Katrina gasped inside the car. Liam hadn't just been embezzling for himself. He had been selling Russo family secrets to a rival mafia boss. "Bradley was a thief and a traitor," Dwayne replied calmly, standing tall. "His accident was entirely self-inflicted, and the pipeline he was feeding you is permanently severed, Arthur. The unlisted accounts are locked." Arthur's eyes drifted past Dwayne, peering through the dark glass of the Maybach. He couldn't see Katrina clearly, but he knew someone was in there. "A pipeline is only as secure as the plumber who fixes it, Dwayne. I hear you have a new CFO. Some fat little desk jockey you elevated from the basement. Do you honestly think a glorified secretary can outsmart my accountants? I will bleed your shipping ports dry by the end of the fiscal quarter. Hand over the new encryption keys, or we go to war." Dwayne didn't even flinch. He simply stepped closer to Arthur, towering over the older man. "You don't have the capital for a war, Arthur. And if you ever speak of my CFO with disrespect again, I will cut out your tongue and feed it to my hounds. Get off my property." Arthur glared at Dwayne, his face flushing with fury. He signaled his men, and they slowly backed away toward their waiting SUVs. "You're getting soft, Russo. Trusting your empire to a plus-size nobody will be your downfall. We'll see who owns the ports on Friday." As the rival vehicles peeled away, Dwayne walked back to the Maybach and opened the door. Katrina was shaking, her mind racing. She had stepped out of the frying pan of corporate abuse and directly into the raging fire of a mafia war. "He's going to attack the company," Katrina said, her voice barely a whisper, as Dwayne helped her out of the car. "Let him try," Dwayne said, pulling her close, kissing the top of her head. "I have an army of enforcers. He cannot touch us." Katrina looked up into his amber eyes, her brilliant, mathematically gifted mind already clicking into high gear. She remembered the routing numbers Liam had used. She remembered the dummy corporations Arthur Moretti was likely hiding behind. "You don't need an army of enforcers, Dwayne," Katrina said, her voice steadying as a newfound, ruthless confidence bloomed in her chest. She smoothed down the rich fabric of her emerald dress, embracing her space and her power. "You just need your CFO. Give me access to the Syndicate's master servers. I am going to completely bankrupt Arthur Moretti by Thursday." The underground ballroom of the Continental Hotel was a cavern of velvet, cigar smoke, and dangerous secrets. It was Thursday night, the traditional evening for the Commission's monthly summit, a neutral gathering where the major syndicates of the Midwest met to negotiate, threaten, and display their power. Katrina stood beside Dwayne at the head of a massive mahogany table. She was no longer trembling. Draped in a stunning, custom-tailored black velvet gown with a plunging neckline that proudly displayed her magnificent cleavage, she looked every inch a mafia queen. Her frizzy hair had been expertly styled into cascading voluminous curls, and a bold, blood-red lipstick painted her full lips. She stood tall, refusing to shrink her 200-pound frame. She let her lush, heavy curves demand the space they deserved in the room full of lethal men. Dwayne kept a possessive, heavy hand resting on the bare skin of her lower back, a silent, terrifying warning to every man in the room who dared to stare at her for a second too long. Across the table sat Arthur Moretti. He looked smug, flanked by his highest-ranking capos and his lead forensic accountant, a sleazy, rail-thin man who was furiously typing on a laptop. Arthur believed he was walking into a victory lap. He thought he had the Russo family cornered. "I'm glad you brought your little pet, Dwayne," Arthur sneered, leaning back in his leather chair and lighting a thick Cuban cigar. He looked Katrina up and down with blatant disgust. "Though I'm surprised you could find a dress big enough to cover her. Did you borrow a parachute from your logistics division?" A few of Arthur's men chuckled. The sound was immediately cut off as Dwayne's hand left Katrina's back, sliding toward the gun at his waist. The room plunged into a suffocating, deadly silence. But Katrina gently placed her soft, manicured hand over Dwayne's rigid forearm, stopping him. She didn't need physical violence to destroy a man. She was a weapon of mass financial destruction. "Mr. Moretti," Katrina spoke, her voice clear, melodious, and carrying absolute authority. "I would worry less about my dress size and significantly more about your plummeting net worth, though I suppose an empty wallet is much lighter to carry." Arthur scoffed, blowing a cloud of smoke toward the ceiling. "A cute script, sweetheart. But my accountants have already bypassed Liam Bradley's old firewalls. We have a freeze on your primary shipping manifests. By midnight, your European cargo routes will default to my holding companies." Katrina smiled, a cold, terrifying smile that perfectly mirrored Dwayne's. She reached down, picked up a sleek black tablet from the table, and slid it gracefully across the mahogany surface until it bumped into Arthur's cigar ashtray. "You should really check your work, Arthur," Katrina said, her tone dripping with the exact condescension she had suffered from people like him for years. When Liam set up the embezzlement pipeline, he used a decentralized crypto tumbler to hide the trail. It was clever, but fundamentally unstable. When you tried to access it using your brute force algorithms on Tuesday, you tripped a recursive trap I engineered into the ledger. Arthur's accountant suddenly went pale. His fingers stopped typing. He stared wildly at his laptop screen. "What is she talking about?" Arthur barked, looking at his accountant. Sir," the accountant stammered, sweat pouring down his thin face. The offshore accounts. They're empty. Our primary accounts. The Cayman holdings, the real estate trusts, the union pension funds we skimmed. They're zeroed out." Arthur lunged forward, grabbing Katrina's tablet. The screen displayed a live feed of his criminal empire's financial lifeblood. Every single account was drained. "You didn't just freeze my shipping lines, Arthur," Katrina explained softly, resting her plush hands on the table and leaning forward, letting the sheer presence of her intellect crush the room. "You accidentally opened a back door directly into your own private servers. I didn't just lock you out of Russo Logistics. I systematically siphoned every single dollar of your illegal revenue, over $400 million. It has all been routed, washed, and permanently buried in untraceable philanthropic trusts under fake names. You are completely bankrupt." "You lying fat cow," Arthur roared, throwing the tablet against the wall where it shattered into a dozen pieces. He reached for his weapon, completely losing his mind. Before Arthur's hand even touched his holster, Dwayne moved. He didn't draw his gun. He vaulted over the corner of the heavy table with the speed of a striking viper. He grabbed Arthur by the lapels of his suit and slammed him backward into the stone wall of the ballroom. The impact knocked the wind out of the rival boss in a violent rush. Dwayne pinned Arthur to the wall by his throat, his amber eyes burning with unholy fury. Arthur's men reached for their weapons, but the entire room was suddenly filled with the sound of 20 guns cocking. Dwayne's enforcers had every single one of Moretti's men dead to rights. "You lost the war before you even fired a shot, Arthur," Dwayne growled, his face inches from the bankrupt man's sweating forehead. "My CFO just stripped you of your power, your money, and your dignity. You are nothing now. If I see your face in Chicago again, I will let her strip you of your life. Get out." Dwayne threw Arthur to the ground. The formerly powerful Mafia Boss scrambled to his feet, coughing and humiliated, staring at Katrina with sheer, unadulterated terror. He realized then what Dwayne had seen all along. The soft, heavy, plus-size woman in the velvet dress was not a pet. She was the most dangerous predator in the room. Arthur and his men fled the ballroom, leaving the heavy doors swinging in their wake. The remaining syndicate bosses at the table stared at Katrina in absolute, silent awe. No one cared about her weight. No one saw a victim. They saw a terrifying genius who had just toppled an empire with a keystroke. Dwayne slowly turned around, adjusting his cuffs. He walked back to Katrina, the violent rage completely bleeding out of him, replaced by a profound, overwhelming pride. He wrapped his arms around her thick waist, pulling her flush against his chest in front of the entire underworld. "Brilliant," Dwayne murmured against her lips, kissing her deeply, marking her as his equal, his partner, and his undisputed queen. Absolutely brilliant. Snow began to fall softly over Chicago, dusting the wrought-iron street lamps and the iconic stone facade of the Drake Hotel. Inside the legendary Gold Coast landmark, the grand ballroom was alive with the clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the low, murmuring hum of the city's ultra-wealthy. It was the annual Winter Solstice Gala, a highly publicized charity event that served as a thinly veiled networking ground for politicians, corporate titans, and the invisible power brokers of the underworld. For the first time in her life, Katrina Evans was not sitting at home, burying her face in a pint of ice cream and crying over the cruel text messages Liam used to send her. Tonight, she was the undisputed center of gravity in the most exclusive room in the Midwest. Katrina stood near a towering ice sculpture, a vision of unapologetic, devastating power. She was swathed in a custom, deep sapphire blue velvet gown designed explicitly for her measurements by a private atelier in Milan. The heavy, luxurious fabric clung to every glorious inch of her 200-pound frame. The corset bodice lifted and showcased her abundant, soft breasts, while the dramatic draping over her hips accentuated the wide, lush thickness of her thighs. A staggering diamond necklace, a gift from Dwayne, rested heavily against her collarbone, catching the light of the massive crystal chandeliers. She wasn't hiding. She was holding court. "The restructuring of the South Loop developments is moving smoothly, Mr. Mayor," Katrina said, smoothly, taking a delicate sip of her sparkling water. She looked the mayor of Chicago dead in the eye, fully aware that Dwayne's political donations were the only thing keeping the man in office. However, the zoning permits for the docks need to be expedited by Tuesday. I trust that won't be an issue. The mayor, a man who usually intimidated everyone he spoke to, nervously dabbed his forehead with a silk handkerchief. He glanced quickly at Dwayne, who was standing just 3 feet away, watching Katrina with the proud, fiercely possessive gaze of a lion observing his mate. "Of course, Miss Evans," the mayor stammered, bowing his head slightly. "I'll have my chief of staff personally deliver the signed permits to your office by Monday afternoon." As the politician scurried away, Katrina allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. She felt Dwayne's heavy, warm hand slide onto the small of her back, the heat of his palm radiating through the blue velvet. "You are terrifying," Dwayne murmured in her ear, his deep voice sending a cascade of shivers down her spine. "I have spent 10 years bribing that man, and he has never looked as frightened of me as he just looked of you." Katrina leaned back into his solid chest, her heart fluttering. "I just reminded him of the financial realities of his campaign, Dwayne. Math doesn't care about his political posturing. The numbers are absolute." Dwayne turned her gently in his arms, his pale amber eyes dark with adoration. "You are absolute, Mia Regina." He reached up, his calloused thumb gently brushing a stray curl from her cheek. "Do you see how they look at you tonight? No one is looking through you. They see exactly what I see. A queen." Katrina looked around the room. It was true. A few months ago, in her baggy grey sweaters, these socialites would have treated her like the help. Now, the impossibly thin, Botox-filled wives of the corporate executives were glaring at her with naked envy. The powerful men were looking at her with a mix of deep respect and undisguised lust, though none dared approach her while Dwayne Russo stood at her side. She had reclaimed her body, realizing that her softness, her size, and her curves were not flaws to be minimized, but a magnificent canvas of her femininity. "I need to use the powder room," Katrina whispered, placing a soft kiss on Dwayne's jaw. "I'll be right back." Dwayne nodded, his eyes scanning the crowd with automatic, lethal precision. 2 minutes, then I'm taking you home to peel that dress off you." Katrina blushed furiously, her pulse racing as she navigated through the sea of tuxedos and ball gowns toward the grand marble corridor that led to the private restrooms. The hallway was quiet, dimly lit by antique sconces, a stark contrast to the loud, buzzing energy of the ballroom. As she approached the heavy oak doors of the ladies' room, a shadow detached itself from a nearby alcove. Katrina gasped, instinctively stepping back. Stepping into the dim light was Liam Bradley, but he was completely unrecognizable from the smug, impeccably groomed finance bro who had tormented her. His expensive suit was torn and stained. His nose was heavily bandaged, crooked and swollen from where Dwayne's enforcer had shattered it. One of his eyes was swollen completely shut, blooming with ugly yellow and purple bruises. He looked erratic, starving, and deeply unhinged. "Liam?" Katrina breathed, her stomach dropping. "Surprised to see me, Shamu?" Liam hissed, his voice raspy and broken. He reached into his oversized coat and pulled out a heavy, dark pistol, aiming it directly at her chest with a trembling hand. Katrina froze, the air leaving her lungs, but surprisingly, she didn't feel the paralyzing, suffocating terror she used to feel when Liam berated her. Looking at him now, a pathetic, broken man hiding in the shadows of a bathroom hallway, the illusion of his power over her completely shattered. "What are you doing here, Liam?" Katrina asked, her voice remarkably steady. "Dwayne exiled you. You were supposed to leave Chicago." "Leave?" Liam spat, taking a step closer, waving the gun frantically. "With what money? You drained Moretti's accounts. Moretti put a hit out on me because he thinks I gave you the access codes. The cops are looking for me because of the embezzlement. I have nothing. My life is ruined because of you, you fat, miserable bitch." Katrina stood tall. She didn't cross her arms over her stomach. She didn't try to shrink. She let the heavy sapphire velvet drape proudly over her lush figure. She looked at the gun, then back up to his desperate, bruised face. "Your life is ruined because of your own greed, Liam," Katrina said coldly. "You thought you could abuse me, steal from the most dangerous syndicate in the city, and sell secrets to a rival, all without facing the consequences. You thought my silence was weakness. It wasn't. It was survival. And I don't need to survive you anymore." "Shut up," Liam cried, tears of frustration spilling from his good eye. "I'm going to kill you. I'll shoot you, and then You'll do nothing." A voice colder than the Chicago winter echoed from the end of the hallway. Liam spun around, letting out a pathetic squeak of terror. Dwayne Russo stood at the entrance of the corridor. He didn't have his gun drawn. He didn't need to. The sheer, overwhelming aura of lethal violence radiating from him was enough to suck all the oxygen out of the hallway. Behind him stood 4 of his most heavily armed enforcers, their suppressed weapons already leveled at Liam's head. "Drop it, Bradley," Dwayne ordered, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a death sentence. "If that weapon discharges, even by accident, my men will not kill you. They will take you to the basement of the meat-packing plant, and they will keep you alive for a very, very long time." Liam sobbed, his hand shaking so violently the gun rattled. He looked at Katrina, then at Dwayne. The absolute crushing reality of his situation finally dawned on him. He was a rat trapped in a titanium cage. With a pathetic whimper, Liam dropped the gun. It clattered loudly against the marble floor. He fell to his knees, covering his face with his dirty hands, weeping like a child. Dwayne didn't even look at the pathetic man on the floor. He strode forward, his eyes locked entirely on Katrina. He closed the distance between them, wrapping his arms fiercely around her thick waist and pulling her against him, burying his face in the crook of her neck. "Are you hurt?" Dwayne demanded, his voice thick with an emotion that sounded terrifyingly close to fear, a fear the Mafia Boss had never felt before in his entire life. "I'm perfectly fine," Katrina whispered, wrapping her soft, plump arms around his broad shoulders, holding him just as tightly. "He didn't touch me. He's just a coward." Dwayne pulled back slightly, looking deep into her eyes. Finding no lie there, the fear in his gaze instantly morphed back into cold, calculated vengeance. He turned his head slightly to look at his enforcers. "Don't kill him," Katrina said suddenly, her voice echoing clearly in the hallway. Liam looked up, a pathetic spark of hope in his swollen eye. Dwayne frowned, looking down at her. "Katrina, he pulled a weapon on you. He dies tonight. Death is too quick for what he did to me, and what he did to your business," Katrina stated, stepping out of Dwayne's embrace and looking down at Liam with absolute, chilling authority. She was a master of numbers, and she understood the mathematics of true karma. If he disappears, he becomes a ghost, a mystery. I don't want him to be a mystery. I want him to be an example. She looked up at Dwayne. "I've already compiled the digital footprint of his embezzlement, the wire fraud, and his communication with Arthur Moretti. It violates the RICO Act on 7 different federal levels. I sent the encrypted file to the FBI field office on Roosevelt Road, an hour before we arrived at this gala. Dwayne's eyes widened slightly, a profound, awe-struck grin spreading across his face. The feds are probably raiding his apartment right now, Katrina continued calmly. Hand him over to the corrupt officers at the 18th District. Tell them to process him through the official channels. He will go to the Cook County Jail general population. Every inmate in that prison works for the Russo Syndicate. Let them know he is a snitch who stole from the family. Liam screamed, scrambling backward on the marble floor. No, no, please, just shoot me. Please, God, Russo, just put a bullet in me. Don't send me there. Federal prison was bad. Cook County Jail, as a known mafia informant and thief, was a guaranteed, agonizing nightmare from which Liam would never wake up. It was the ultimate, horrifying karma for a man who cared only about his pristine image and his arrogant pride. Dwayne began to laugh, a dark, rich, booming sound that echoed off the marble walls. He looked at Katrina as if she had personally hung the moon and the stars in the sky. Take him to the 18th District, Dwayne ordered his men, his eyes never leaving Katrina. Make sure the warden knows exactly who he is. The enforcers grabbed the screaming, violently thrashing Liam by his arms, dragging him down the back service corridor. His desperate cries faded into the distance, leaving the hallway perfectly, peacefully quiet. 6 months later, the suffocating heat of the Chicago summer beat down on the private, sprawling terrace of the Russo estate. The air smelled of blooming jasmine and the faint, salty breeze coming off Lake Michigan. Katrina sat on a plush, white linen lounger under the shade of a massive pergola. She was dressed in a simple, incredibly sheer white silk robe that hung loosely off her heavy, spectacular curves. Beneath it, she wore nothing but the golden sunlight that filtered through the wooden slats above. Her thick thighs were curled beneath her, and she was lazily typing on a silver laptop resting on her plush stomach. The Russo Syndicate had never been more powerful. With Arthur Moretti utterly bankrupted and driven out of the state, and Liam Bradley serving a 30-year federal sentence while living in daily, agonizing terror inside maximum security, Katrina had completely restructured the family's financial infrastructure. She had dissolved the vulnerable offshore accounts, funneling the billions of dollars of syndicate money into impenetrable, entirely legitimate real estate developments across the Midwest. The FBI had spent months trying to trace the money Katrina had moved, but her algorithms were ghosts. She had effectively made Dwayne Russo untouchable. She wasn't just his CFO anymore. She was the architect of his entire empire. The heavy glass doors of the terrace slid open, and Dwayne walked out. He had just returned from a meeting with the commission. He had discarded his suit jacket, wearing only a black dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar. The sleeves rolled up to reveal his heavily tattooed forearms. He stopped, leaning against the doorframe, his amber eyes completely fixated on Katrina. He took in the sight of her, the soft, abundant swell of her breasts beneath the sheer silk, the glorious heavy curve of her hips, the radiant makeup-free beauty of her face. He felt a fierce, burning ache in his chest, a love so profound and violent it almost paralyzed him. "You're staring, Mr. Russo," Katrina said without looking up from her screen, a playful, confident smirk tugging at her lips. "I will never stop staring at you, Mrs. Russo," Dwayne replied, his voice a low, gravelly purr. He walked over to the lounger, gently shutting her laptop and tossing it onto a nearby glass table. He climbed onto the lounger with her, his massive frame completely enveloping her soft, plush body. Katrina sighed in pure contentment, wrapping her thick arms around his neck as he buried his face in her heavy cleavage, pressing hot, reverent kisses against her soft skin. "The Commission officially surrendered the northern ports to us today," Duane murmured against her skin. "They didn't even try to negotiate. They know if they anger me, you will bankrupt their entire bloodlines by lunchtime." Katrina laughed, running her fingers through his dark, thick hair. "I only use my powers for evil when people disrespect my husband." Duane pulled back, framing her face with his large, calloused hands. His expression turned deadly serious, stripping away the ruthless Mafia Boss to reveal the man who worshipped the ground. She walked on. "You saved my life, Katrina," Duane whispered fiercely. "Not just my empire. You saved me. You brought light into a world I thought was only darkness. You are the most beautiful, brilliant, magnificent creature God ever created, and I will spend every second of the rest of my life proving that to you." Tears of profound, overwhelming joy pricked Katrina's eyes. She thought of the baggy, grey sweaters she used to hide in. She thought of the years she had spent hating her own body, believing she was unworthy of love, unworthy of respect, unworthy to simply exist, taking up space. She looked at the most dangerous man in Chicago, a man who bowed only to her, and she finally truly believed the truth. She was a masterpiece. "I know," Katrina whispered back, her heart full, pulling his lips down to hers. "I know." And as the golden sun set over the Chicago skyline, casting long, beautiful shadows across the terrace, the invisible ghost of the accounting department officially faded into history, leaving behind only the undisputed, fiercely loved queen of the syndicate. Katrina's journey from a heavily bullied, invisible woman, hiding her gorgeous plus-size figure, to the terrifyingly brilliant, undisputed queen of the mafia, is a testament that true power comes from owning exactly who you are. Karma never misses, and Liam learned the hard way that you never underestimate a brilliant woman. Did Katrina's ultimate revenge satisfy your craving for justice? Drop a comment below with your favorite moment. If you loved this intense, romantic mafia drama, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this story with your friends, and subscribe for more thrilling, karma-filled tales.